Alrighty. Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to Roots. Welcome back to another week of Faithful, alhamdulillah, where we are now week by week going through a text called The Provisions of the Seekers, Zad al-Talibin in Arabic. And alhamdulillah, this is a very beautiful book. I actually really encourage a lot of y'all to go and kind of go find a PDF of it because it really does give a Muslim what he or she needs to just understand the basic principles of what it means to be a Muslim through hadith and through the sayings of companions. And one of the most amazing things about this book is that all of the narrations are very short. Like there's no long. I think that the longest hadith or the longest saying of a companion that's in this book is like maximum 3 lines. It's very, very short. And majority of them are even less than that. Majority of them are like, 1 to 2 lines maximum. Actually, I think half the book is like one-liners, which is really beautiful. And to be quite honest with you, like one of the cool things about our religion, I think, is that, and I kind of spoke about this very briefly last week, is that a lot of people refer to the Quran as like, oh, this miraculous, it's a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, right? It's a miracle of the Prophet's time. I agree with that. I'm not saying I negate that sentiment, but I would say that only the Quran is only one half of the miracle of the Prophet's life. The other half is his own self, his own manners and etiquettes, right? There was a moment where after the Prophet ﷺ died, people went into like a frenzy, like a panic of what to do now, right? Like we can't ask him anything anymore because he's not here with us anymore. And it's almost like you don't appreciate something until it's gone type of mentality. And they used to kind of, and not saying that the companions used to take him for granted, but, almost like not being aware that this man is not going to be around forever. And so after he passed away, there was actually a statement by one of his companions where he said that we started to teach our kids like the sayings of the Prophet, just like we would teach them the verses in the Quran. So there is this level of importance of memorizing a hadith, just like we memorize verses in the Quran, right? Because the Quran, obviously, divine word of God, but the statements of the Prophet are also like almost like your supporting cast of the Quran. Like everything that the Prophet says, it backs up something that was said by Allah in the Quran. And so I think it's really important for all of y'all to kind of keep in mind that, ask yourself, how many hadith do I know in my life? Right? How many hadith have I memorized in my life? Right? Most of us know at least a small amount of Quran. Right? Most of us know just Amma. We know the shorter surahs. We may know like the more important verses and the longer surahs. We know certain kind of parts of Quran like that. But how many of us know the major statements of the Prophet, right? I think a lot of us are great in paraphrasing them, right? We're like, oh, I think the Prophet one time he said that, right? Like we live in the Islam QA generation where we're like, this I searched up on Google one day. I remember this, right? And we can paraphrase a hadith that we heard, right? We can paraphrase a hadith of the Prophet that we heard somewhere, but we can't really say exactly what the Prophet said because we don't have that tradition of just like memorizing his hadith. And I think we should. I really think we should. I think it's a very, very important tradition that I think we should actually follow through with. And so today's hadith is very, very important. And I think it's extremely pivotal for not only young Muslims, but Muslims in general to memorize this statement of the Prophet ﷺ. And this statement actually addresses a very interesting vice that we have in our culture today because it's rampant. It's rampant. And the vice, or, we call this like almost like a disease of the heart, it's the vice of hatred. Okay? The vice of hatred. The idea of hating things, hating people, finding problems with everything that we see. This is a very common issue that we find in our society nowadays. And the Prophet ﷺ, he addressed it. He addressed it very, very head on. And there's a hadith here that I'll read to everybody here, where he says, لا تظهر شماتة لأخيك. Okay, he says, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he says, do not rejoice over the misfortune of your brother. لا تظهر. Okay, do not find happiness in finding the misfortune of a person, right? When you hear bad news, don't be happy about that bad news.
Don't in some way have some sort of weird, sick rejoicing when you find out bad news. Okay, so he says, لا تظهر شماتة لأخيك فيرحمه الله ويبتليك, where he says, lest Allah have mercy upon that person and afflict you with trials. Okay, very powerful hadith. So he's saying, the first part he's saying, don't seek like happiness and the misfortunes of other people, because Allah might actually have mercy on those people and turn their trials into your trials. Very, very like deep narration. And there's a couple of things that I want to kind of get y'all's takes on this as well. So the first thing is, what does it mean, or why do certain people have some sort of rejoicing moment at the misfortune of other people? Let's talk a little bit here. Why do people find any sort of happiness in finding the misfortune of other people? Anyone know? Yes? Jealousy is one. Okay, very good. Sana?
So they can gossip about it with other people.
So they can kind of like discuss it with others, just kind of like the juicy news, right? Like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Okay, very good. Anyone else? So jealousy and gossip are two. Anyone else? Personal gain, what do you mean by that?
Two business owners. One business owner like sucks, one guy is good, does a deal or whatever, he gets all the crowd. He kind of like goes out of business. He's happy on his life.
SubhanAllah. Man, I wish I wasn't live streaming this. God. Okay, but I'll say very generically. There is, unfortunately, there's a group that's on Facebook that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of in Dallas, where the intention, the niyyah is good, right? The niyyah is to kind of like give good, very non-biased reviews on certain establishments in Dallas. But what ends up happening a lot of times is that it gets very, very vicious very quickly. Okay, you start off with saying like, oh, I'm gonna give you my honest review about so and so, or like certain business or that business, and then for some odd reason, it always, unfortunately, goes through this pattern of just starting to just rage on people. Right, this place sucks. This place is horrible. My intentions are clean though, brother. Right, like when a Muslim has to kind of like give you that confidence that like their intention is good after ranting on something, there's a little bit of a red flag there, right? Because if your intention was really good, you should have gone about in a different way, right? That you actually did. It's like saying like you're yelling at somebody and you're just kind of raging on them, be like, but I'm not angry at you. Like, really now? Because you just kind of ripped me to shreds like 5 seconds ago. I don't know if you're really not angry at me, right? Like, hey, I don't want to like say this. I shouldn't be saying this. Like, then don't say it. I love when people start off with, when people are like, I really shouldn't be saying this. It's none of my business. I'm like, khalas, that's it, right? Like don't say it right then and there. Maybe there's a better way of thinking about it, right? Yeah, Omar?
I was gonna say it's like saying at the beginning, oh, no offense, but
Right, exactly. Like if you really mean no offense, then surely there's a better way of rephrasing what you're about to say, right? Because most of the times, unfortunately, and this is the pattern of what I've kind of experienced in my 28 years of life, is that when somebody says no offense, what they're about to say is very offensive, right? Like it's always kind of a very like easily read type of situation where you can tell there's something to come. So what I'm saying is that, so to back up what Abdullah was saying, is that sometimes people, they find this very strange means of gain from hating somebody else, right? Like there's a sense of like, oh, I will actually gain some benefit for myself through finding, or exhibiting hate towards somebody else. Okay, very good. Anyone else? Any reason why people, find pleasure in the misfortune of other people? Anyone? So we said gain, right? Benefit for themselves, jealousy, gossip. Anyone else? Any idea? I have one. I can think of one. One's to make myself feel better. By finding flaws in other people, it makes me feel better about myself, right? It's almost like not addressing the elephant in the room when it comes to me and focusing on the issues of other people, right? Like if I can point out the flaws in that person, I don't have to address the flaws to me. I don't have time to do it, right? It's almost deflecting. Okay, very good. Yeah, Omar, you had something?
I was gonna say like maybe it's kind of like hatred in a sense where like you dislike someone, so then you're like, oh, kind of like good riddance that it happened to that kind of person. Like the idea of karma maybe, but like
yes.
maybe something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? Like it's driven by like your general dislike of somebody. Okay, very good. Which is actually a point that we're about to address right now, is that there are different points of hatred or hate in Islam, right? The first point you can kind of point out as a general hatred towards somebody or something, right? That's what drives you. There is this kind of idea of human beings being very they have good memory of bad experiences, right? If a person looks at you in a weird way, or if a person says something to you that they didn't mean, and that kind of sparks this very huge, pattern of dislike towards somebody or something or an entity, right? And we always kind of make fun of this, that like, as younger generations make fun of the older generations about like not being invited to their wedding, right? Oh, because why? I don't really know, but their ancestor said something really weird. They return a salam to my ancestor, so I can't go to your wedding. I'm sorry, right? It's like a very like bizarre situation. Okay, like your person lives on the other side of the street that you lived on a street of a person that hated my grandfather. So now I hate you because you live on that street. Like it's like very like nonsensical, like bizarre nonsense, right? I mean, like, but this is really where things start. I mean, there are stories even in the traditions of the pious people around the Prophet's time where they literally, I mean, one of the most bizarre moments of the Prophet's life was before he received revelation. There was a battle or a war. It was actually called Harb al-Fijar. Right? Harb means war, and Fijar means like a corrupt or like an unjust war. And it struck up from literally a person who cheated another person in business, and because of that, it led to like a physical altercation between them two, which led to a giant battle between their two families and communities. Like something that could have been resolved right away. And to be quite honest with you, this is why Islam was necessary during the Prophet's time. I mean, it was a very just a chaotic environment. As soon as you had a problem with one person, it would just spark, like the lighter would the spark and immediately just cause like a giant explosion. And it could be something so trivial. Something that can be fixed with a conversation. Something that can be fixed with an apology. But no, it cannot be fixed with an apology because now my honor is taken, your honor is taken. Now we're all fighting with each other. And the Prophet says one of the most beautiful things about him is that he didn't have time for this stuff. He didn't have time for this stuff. Like genuinely, y'all ever figure out moments in your life where you just don't have time for that nonsense? Like you're just drama free. You're just like, you don't really need this in your life right now. The Prophet didn't need that in his life. Like this drama that people conjure up. I mean, subhanAllah, like literally like ZTV is what sometimes Muslims try to just reenact in their own lives, right? Like I have to reenact this drama that I saw the other day. The mother-in-law hates the daughter-in-law. I must follow this sunnah, right? Like it's so ridiculous, honestly. Like it's so ridiculous, and people really like find inspiration and stuff. And so the Prophet ﷺ was like, no, I'm not gonna fight here. I'm not gonna do it. And the people, his own community, right, the Banu Hashim, literally would tell him, well, you're dishonoring your family by not participating in this battle because that person's honor was taken. And the Prophet ﷺ was like, no, dude, his honor was not taken because now you have to fight because now you have to fight because of it. Let's think how we should solve this issue. And they forced him to actually participate in that battle. And you know his way of participating in that battle was? Anyone know? He goes, I'll participate. I'll do something. You know what it was? Every arrow that was misfired in the battle, he would go up and pick it up and he would put it back in place. Because y'all wanted me to be a part of it, right? Like, I'm a part of it. You know, like that one dude that reads the fine print? He was like, I read the fine print. This is what my participation will entail me and allow me to do, okay? And so that was what the Prophet was. He was a person who didn't exude this hatred. He didn't have room in his heart for hatred, because what happens is when you have room in your heart for hating people, what ends up happening is that you have very little room in your heart for optimism, for thinking good of other people. Like the moment something happens that remotely rubs you the wrong way, the only thing you can think of is how that was towards you, right? The only thing you can think of is how that was meant to just annoy you a little bit. What does she mean by what you're wearing is nice? Right? Maybe it was just a compliment. No, not from her. It must be passive aggressive, right? Like we literally conjure up hypothetical myth, like literally myths. Like you could go in the library and find it in the fictional shelf of the books. Like it's not real, but we somehow convince ourselves that it's real. Okay, so that's the first thing. Like hatred for people, when there's no reason for it to exist. It could be solved with a very simple conversation. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the scholars, they say The second way of finding hatred is finding out if you're not finding that initial hatred, ask yourself, do you exhibit passive aggressive behavior? This is a really, really big one. Really, really big one. What are some of the harms of being passive aggressive? Let's hear from y'all a little bit. What are some of the harms of being passive aggressive? Anyone? You're like, it's a part of Pakistani. I don't know what you mean. Right? Go ahead. Everyone on live stream can stop watching. People what?
People don't feel safe around you.
People don't feel safe around you. Good.
I feel like it's not just me, but like when someone's passive aggressive, like everything that they say, you're thinking about like, oh, they said this, but what if they actually meant this?
Right. You're interpreting.
Yeah.
You're doing your own interpretation in your head.
And
Very good.
to like misinterpreting like what they're actually saying. That
You're
leads to more problems.
very good. Assuming,
Yeah.
right? Assuming. Okay, very good. Yes. Yeah. Right. Right, exactly. Right. Like you're almost anticipating it, right? You're just waiting for it to happen, right? So they say, like the scholars, they say, like being sarcastic in your behavior, thinking like, everything is like, supposed to have some sort of wit into it, right? You can never be sincerely honest with somebody. And there's a paper that I actually read, there's an article that I read the other day. It was really interesting. It's not my car, smoke car. That's smoke car. There's an article that I read the other day that said and they did the study. It was actually at Howard University. They did the study, and they did kind of like a general poll with their students, and said that one of the reasons why people tend to be passive aggressive in relationships and conversations is because they find it very uncomfortable to be vulnerable and sincere with people. Like just saying how they feel is very uncomfortable for them. So they have to say something passive. They have to say something like sarcastic, because being real is very scary to certain people, right? How are you doing? Oh, great, right? Because telling somebody that you're not doing so well is very, very intimidating. You know what I'm saying? So it's very interesting how sometimes Islamic teachings sometimes come out in modern day secular studies. How sometimes being too real with somebody, being vulnerable with somebody is too much of a fear for people, so they have to be passive aggressive with other people. And the third thing is the one I want to talk about is the idea of mocking and trolling, intentionally harming somebody. There's a very beautiful sub hadith that I want to share with you guys, and this is one that I want you guys to memorize. And it's a very, very short hadith that I think everyone should memorize. Okay, and this hadith comes in two versions. There's one in one book and one in another book as a switch of like one word, but they both generally mean the same thing. So this hadith basically says, "Al-Muslimu man salima an-nasu min lisanihi wa yadihi." Okay, so hadith says, "Al-Muslimu," a Muslim, a person who calls himself a believer. Okay, a person who submits to God. Al-Muslimu man salima an-nas is one who makes people safe min lisanihi wa yadihi, from his own tongue and from his own hands. This is deep, y'all. Super deep. And the other version of this hadith is al-Muslimu man salima al-Muslimun min lisanihi wa yadihi, means like a Muslim is one who makes other Muslims safe from their tongues and from their hands. So what does this mean? What does it mean? Al-Muslimu man salima al-nasu min lisanihi wa yadihi. What does that mean? What does it mean? A Muslim is one who makes safe other people from their tongues and their hands.
So it's like, I feel like when you're talking to someone or like just having a normal conversation, when you're trying to say something you kind of think about before, it's like refrain from saying rude things or mean things, but like maybe say it in a more like kinder manner. Be like, oh, if someone's annoying you, be like, I'm kind of like feeling uncomfortable right now, instead of saying you're annoying. Like, so basically just look for what you're saying, and then also like for the hands part, I guess like make sure your hand or kind of like your whole physical body is not physically harming anyone. So like the hands are part of like the physical part, but then your tongue is the kind of like emotional, mental part of others.
Very good, very, very good. Y'all agree with him? Anybody have anything to add on to it? Anyone? Very good. What he said was very powerful. He said, the part where he says min lisanihi, right? From his or her tongue. Lisan literally means your tongue, right? It means a lot. The Prophet is telling us, be wary of what you say. Be wary of what you say. There's a lot of things that cannot be undone once said. right? I think a lot of people, when it comes to like harm, they think of like physical harm, but a lot of people don't realize how sharp the tongue actually is. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ was a master at controlling his tongue. You know, I mean, I want you guys to think about this very sincerely right now. How many relationships in your life have you witnessed that have been affected by something that somebody has said? Nothing that someone's done physically with their hands or their feet or anything like that, but just a word or a statement that was uttered. And because of that statement that was uttered, that relationship will never be the same ever again. You know, that person will never feel safe in front of that person again. And you know, the beautiful part of this hadith is that the Prophet, he says, Al-Muslimu man salima. Man salima. Salima literally means to make peaceful. Make peaceful for somebody else. Like when you walk into a room, how do people feel about you? It's a serious question, right? How do people feel about you? When you walk into a room, does everyone tighten up? Does everyone tensed up? Does everyone get a little bit frightened for themselves and the surrounding company when you walk in through the doors? Because when, you know, man salima, a person who makes something safe, is when you walk into a room, everyone feels at ease. Everyone feels chill. It's like no big deal at all, right? And there's a difference between like, oh, a person who carries honor and izzah and like the sense of like standards and morals, and they walk in the room, everyone feels like they have to basically be on like good behavior. But there's another thing where like a person walks in a room and you feel like you can't even say a word, right? There's a difference in that. You know, I think a lot of people get those two things confused. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, because of this person, I can't curse anymore. I'm like, no, Habibi, that's a good thing, right? Like, listen, like, don't think that's bad, right? Like, oh, because I can't say what I want to say in front of that person because he's God, right? Like, no, that's a good thing. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy that you have a friend in your life where at least you can be held accountable for your freaking deeds, you idiot. Like, it's not just like you do whatever you want to do in your life and like not be held accountable for it. What we're talking about, the process I'm talking about here, is the idea of making sure that you don't cause discomfort upon other people. You don't cause discomfort upon other people. You don't make a person feel like they literally just have to sit there and shut up and can't say anything in their life, right? So this is what the Prophet min lisani. The first thing is from your tongue, because the tongue is very powerful. The tongue is very, very powerful. There was a very, very famous story from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, where he was walking one day, and he was walking past this woman who was she was grieving. She was grieving, and she was crying very heavily. And so this woman, as she was crying, the Prophet ﷺ passed by her, and he says to her, he says, "Ya ummi, ya, you know, my mother, you know, my aunt." He goes, you know, ittaqillah, like be conscious of God, like beware of Allah, like, you know that Allah is on your side. And you know, I think a lot of times we misinterpret and mistranslate phrases in Islam to think very one dimensionally. Like for example, when you say ittaqillah now, like people just automatically translate out to fear God. It's like, you know, like you're going through something difficult, you're like, fear God, brother. Like, you know, this is like the worst thing. Like, listen, nobody wants to hear that right away, right? Ittaqillah actually means like know that Allah is on your side. Ittaqillah, like, you know, hey, God is, you know, be conscious of Allah. Allah will be there for you. That's what ittaqillah actually means. It's not like fear God, brother. Don't do that stupid thing right there. No. Literally, when he walked by that woman, he said, ittaqillah, oh, be conscious of Allah. Allah is with you, right? And so he goes, no, get away from me. Get away from me. Can't you see that I'm bereaving here? Can't you see that I'm grieving here? Can't you see that I'm sad? Give me my space. The Prophet goes away. He goes away, and he just walks away. And a third party witnessed that altercation between them. Like a third party saw that happening. And so this third party goes to this woman. He goes, do you know who that was? She goes, you know who that was that you just dismissed like that? And she was like wiping away her tears. Like, who? She goes, that was the messenger of God. And she runs to him and says, Ya Rasulullah, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you. And he goes, no, it's fine. You're grieving, right? It's fine. The Prophet just didn't have room in his heart to hate people, man. Could you like imagine like that moment, like for God, you know, God forbid, may Allah protect us from, you know, being like be people of any sort of responsibility. Honestly, nowadays, like we don't deserve it, like the Prophet deserved it. Could you imagine if you were like a person in the shoes of the Prophet at that moment, and you told that person, "Hey, God's on your side." So I was like, "Leave me alone." You're like, "Do you know who I am?" Like, do you have any idea who you just turn around, woman? Like, just look at my face right now. Like, no, dude. Like, he just walked away. She said, "Get away," and he got away. Right? That's what he did. And so he didn't have any place in his life for that. There was another really incredible story. I'll tell you guys this really cool story. I don't know if I told you guys a story before, but really incredible. I heard this story from somebody else, and it really shook me. It hit me really deep. There was a story of this, Masjid uncles, mashallah, Masjid uncles, we all love them. May Allah, bless them and raise them in ranks and preserve them. So there was this Masjid uncle, and we all know that Masjid uncle. That's just a sweet person, right? They're always the first there for Isha, last one to leave. Always make sure that everything is like nicely put. I used to have this uncle growing up in the masjid. He used to make sure that when we when we walked into the masjid, and we were like smelly like 14-year-old dudes playing basketball right before Aisha Salah, so it was like gross. I understand now like why I was such a horrible human being. But like I used to play basketball like hours and hours before like the Salah time came in, and when we used to walk in, he would literally stand at the door like as the adhan was called, and all of like our friends, he would literally sit there with like an itr bottle, like a bottle of perfume, and just take it out and just like put it on our arm one by one. It's like scanning your QR code when you walk into a Roots program. It's like, here you go, one for you, one for you. Why did he do that? Because he has so much respect for like presenting yourself in a really nice way in front of Allah, that he just wanted to make sure that we all smelled really good. Like when you're young and you're dumb, you're like, you think you're mean, like you think I smell bad. I'm like, no, I actually did smell really bad, right? Like he was right all along. So like that was something he did because he loved the masjid so much. So there was a story of this masjid uncle who, he would always be the one that says salam to everybody. Always says salam to everybody. Every single person. Doesn't matter who, man, child, elder, younger, whatever it is. Says salam to everybody. One day he witnessed these two people like just going at each other in the masjid, like really arguing in the masjid. It's a turn off for a lot of people, because you come to play. Imagine if you came to Roots and all you saw was like people fighting. You'd be like, bro, like I came to Roots to like relax. I didn't come here to like drama's at home, right? Like I don't need this here. Like I come here to have like a very peaceful time. And so he saw these two brothers, in the corner of the masjid, and they were like fighting with each other, just like yelling at each other. And he was very turned off by that behavior. He didn't like that. And so for the next few weeks, this uncle would very vehemently not say salam to these two people. Like very, very strategically. He'd say salam to everybody else, but he wouldn't say salam to these two guys that he witnessed getting into a fight at the masjid. And so these two guys, they made up and they got over it, just like most, fights usually, and like they're very, very, climactic when they do happen. Then after it's over, you realize how stupid it was. So these two guys, they look at each other like, man, he hates us. He hates us. Like, why does he says salam to everybody. The salam is like a standard thing that this guy gives everyone. Why isn't he saying salam to us? So they both go up to this uncle, to Uncle Saab, why aren't you, are you mad at us? Like, I know that we misbehaved the other day and we shouldn't have gotten angry. Why aren't you saying salam to us? It happened like a week ago. And he goes, no, I'm not angry at you. I'm not angry at you. I don't get angry at people. And so they go, what? Well, then why are you avoiding us? He goes, because I saw the way that you spoke to each other that day, and I was afraid that if I spoke to you, that you would speak to me that way. Subhanallah, man. That is crazy. He goes, no, I'm not angry at you. I'm afraid. Because I'm afraid that if I approached you from the way that you were speaking to each other, I was afraid that maybe I would do something to you that would gain that sort of, anger towards me from you. I didn't want that. So I would rather just let you just do your thing, and you approach me when you're cool, when your anger is like worn off. Those two guys didn't think for once that their fight with each other had anything to do with anybody else. But do you see now what the Prophet ﷺ means by min lisanihi, the tongue and what it says? That it's not only what you say to the person you're directly saying it to, but rather it has an effect on the environment around you. You know how many times, subhanAllah, y'all, like in my life where it's not been like a conflict between one and the other. It's actually been something that somebody heard somebody else say, and like, yeah, I don't like that type of behavior. I don't want to be friends with that person. I saw them doing this thing. He said this to that person. I don't want that in my life. So don't just think that like your words only have an effect on the direct recipient of that communication, right? There's people around you that also have an effect, that are affected by it. And the second thing he says, وَيَدِهِ, and what Omar was saying, a second ago, يَدِهِ, literally what the Prophet was saying is by your actions, right? That a Muslim is the person who makes other Muslims safe, or other people safe from their tongue and their actions. It always starts with the tongue, though. It always starts with the tongue, right? The tongue is easy, right? When you speak, it's easy. Action's harder. So if you say it, and this is one of the most like beautiful, like it's poetic almost. It's almost poetic that if you say something, you will almost act it out into reality eventually, right? If you say you hate somebody enough, you'll eventually convince your heart and your hands and your limbs to act out that hate. If you say that you love somebody, right? You like tell your mother that you love her, you will start doing actions that show that you love her, right? Acts never very seldom stay in the tongue. They always get acted out. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying is that be mindful, like what Omar said, be mindful of the tongue. Be mindful of what the tongue says, because the heart and the body will follow suit very, very quickly, right? So be wary of that. All right. So the way that inshallah we're going to end with today, inshallah, is what you should do. How should a believer approach people when they're going through pain and difficulty, right? Like we talked about at the beginning, the hadith, the initial hadith was that you should never seek any joy from the misfortune of other people, the Prophet says. So how should a believer go about the misfortune of other people? Number one, the first thing, and you guys can take this home with you, this tips to take home. A believer should sincerely want the best for everyone else, honestly. Like ask yourself the serious question. Do you really want the best for the people around you? Okay? And this is backed up by a hadith. The Prophet says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب أخيه ما يحب لنفسه. That a believer amongst you does not really believe. You do not really believe until you love حتى يحب الأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. Until you love for your brother or sister what you love for yourself. You're not a believer, man. Like if you don't really want the best for your brothers and sisters, then your Islam is suffering. Your Islam is suffering. And it goes in every direction you can think of, right? You walk into a masjid and you see a prayer spot. You should want your brother to have that prayer spot as well. You walk into Roots and you see like a parking spot that's close to the front door. You'd be like, nah, you know what? Like I'll let that guy take it. I'll let him take it. I can walk like 20 feet. It's not that bad. I would want that spot for myself, but because now I established that I want it for myself, I'm actually going to give it to somebody else. Look at the gifts that you give people. This is a very tangible way to look out for this. Look at the gifts you give for other people and the things you buy for yourself. A very, very big way of looking at it, right? When you buy things for yourself, what do you buy? Are you okay? Are you okay with great value? Something like, great value, right? Like when I buy garlic powder, I'm buying that like the good brand, right? Like, but when you get stuff for other people, it's like, Walmart brand will be it's not bad, right? I would get it for myself. Okay, then get it for yourself. It's always conflicting. So what do you get for yourself? What do you get for other people? Okay, like what is the status of what you do for other people? Do you actually put your heart into it, or do you just kind of like when you have time do stuff for other people, right? Do you go above and beyond? Do you really want for other people what you want for yourself? No, that's the one thing. The second thing is feel sympathy and empathy for others, man. Sympathy and empathy towards others is a huge trait of a Muslim. And we are really challenged in this department nowadays because we live in a social media generation where we're like sending prayers and vibes, inshallah, right? Like we're all about that life, right? As soon as we see something happening, oh my God, send prayers, du'as, right? Like there'll literally be people who say sending du'as and they can't lift their own hands for an actual du'a. They sound like a du'a emoji, right? Like literally, I'm like, you're literally clicking a button, but you cannot raise your own hand to actually make real du'a. Okay? Like we suffer in this generation, y'all. We really do. We live in this very, very like pseudo-religious generation where we're like, everyone's deep. Right? Everyone's super deep. Everyone's like, Imam Ghazali said this. Ibn Taymiyyah said that. And then when it comes to the actual, like, the nuts and bolts of it, we don't do anything. Right? We're all very well read. We think we are. We're all like, oh yeah, Allah Ta'ala actually says in Surah Al-Balad, right? Like, but then in reality, when it comes time to act it out, we don't do it. Right? Like, you know what the companions used to do? The companions used to memorize one surah and acted their whole life. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. That's all they would memorize. But you know what they did? They lived by that thing. Nowadays we got, mashallah, you know, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ, like just going on and on and on and not living one moment of that. Not living one moment of that. And it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility. The more you know in Islam, the more responsible you are in Islam. You know? So be empathetic. Be a sympathetic person. Don't just be a lazy sender of du'as, right? Actively raise your hand. When's the last time you sincerely made dua for your family? For real. When's the last time after a salah that you prayed, you raised your hand and you said, oh Allah, I really, really want my mom to be happy. Oh Allah, I really want my dad, you know, to be happy, and I want my family to be really happy, and I want my family to go through good, you know, happiness and emotions and faith. And you know, when's the last time we did that? We're very quick to run to Allah when we're like, oh Allah, my life sucks right now, right? My family sucks. My mom yelled at me. My dad won't let me do X, Y, Z. So please guide them towards your path, right? Like, but when it comes to like just general, oh Allah, keep my family happy. No, do we do that? Right? Do we do that? Yes. Yeah,
Would it be kind of like, sorry for this, like a bad example.
no, sure.
Kind of like asking a friend for help when you only need it, but not like genuinely trying to
Right, right, and there's a verse of the Quran that talks about that, right? That there, it's in Surah Al-Imran. Allah Ta'ala, He says that the believer is one who remembers God and gives for the sake of Allah in secrecy and in public, sirran wa alaniya, right? In secrecy and in public. So like not only when one situation provides itself, in both situations. Right? When you need Allah right away and when you don't think you need Allah right away, right? So that's like a very, very good key tip to remember. And the last thing is and it kind of, you know, went in the first one, is remembering people in your du'as, right? Really, truly remember people in your du'as. Ask Allah to provide for people. You know, ask Allah to give to people in their lives, and ask through du'a. If you're really trying to get over a hatred in your heart, make du'a for that person. I urge you to do that. You dislike a person, make du'a for them. Do it. It's the number one way. You know how you have all these like weird like life coach tips about how you get hatred out of your heart? Like, well, first tap your wrist once, and like all these stupid like, neurological things. Like, make dua for them. Seriously, make dua for them. If you have any sort of hatred or an inkling of like dislike for somebody in your heart, get over your ego and make dua for that person. Do it. No one else will know. And you don't gotta tell Instagram that you overcame a hatred in your life. You just gotta make dua for that person privately, and you'll start to realize that hatred will start to kind of just alleviate itself. Like, how can you hate someone you made dua for? It feels weird, right? Oh Allah, help this person. I hate this person, but help this person. Right? Like, you can't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like when you make dua, automatically there's like this barakah that gets put into your relationship. That makes it better automatically. Okay, and so we'll inshallah keep these couple things in mind. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Taala to make us people who really don't carry hatred in our hearts for people. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us people who genuinely love others for the sake of Allah, genuinely want the best for others. We ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to make us people who don't find any happiness in the misfortune of other people, and we rejoice in the happiness of other people. And we ask Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala to allow us to love for our brothers and sisters what we love for ourselves, and truly allow us to be unselfish and selfless, and people who think of others all the time, constantly, even better so than we think for ourselves at times. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.